Okay, can we start? Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the security session of APRICOT 2021. My name is Shutz Chair, Harrison Networks Japan, and working as a program committee member of this APRICOT 2021, and co-moderator this security session with AFIFA. Before starting a session, there is some housekeeping topic. Be mind of code of conduct published on the APRICOT 2021 website and in the chat box. If you have a question or comment for the presentation, then use the Q&A button on Zoom for text, and I and Afifa will read out your comment or question. Use Zoom chat for any question you have about the event using Zoom or any other issue not related to the presentation. More helps in available on APRICOT 2021 website. Share photo of your attending the conference on Twitter or Facebook using #APRICOT 2021. If your question hasn't been answered, please send it to the secretary at apricot.net, and we will forward it to the speaker. If you experience some technical issue, we recommend that you download the Zoom mobile app as a backup and use a headset to maximize the best remote experience. For any inquiry or question unanswered during the APRICOT session, technical or non-technical, refer to security at apricot.net. Then I'll pass the ball to the Afifa to start the session.
Thank you so much, Shishio. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the security session of APRICOT 2021. I'm Afifa Abbas. We'll be co-moderating the session along with Shishio. Sessions like this basically gives us the opportunity to know more what is happening around the security industry. Among all the fantastic lineups, now I would like to introduce our first speaker of this security session of APRICOT 2021, Shane Alcock from University of Waikato, and he will be shedding light on lawful interception and the OpenLI project. Over to you, Shane. And just a gentle reminder for all the speakers that each speaker will get 20 minutes of time, including Q&A. So requesting you all to keep up with the time. Over to you, Shane.
Thank you very much. Let's share my screen and hopefully everyone can see that. If not,
yes, we can see that.
That's great. So yes, as you just heard, my name is Shane Alcock. I work at the University of Waikato as a research programmer, and over the past 3 or so years, I've been the lead developer on the OpenLI project, which is a project that tries to give network operators an open source option when dealing with their lawful intercept obligations. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I'll just briefly sort of go over what lawful intercept is. So essentially it's a legal and authorized interception of telecommunications. And this is a power that is granted by governments to law enforcement agencies, such as the police or intelligence services or national security agencies. And they're given this power to allow them to be able to try and investigate, prevent, or otherwise prove that perhaps some criminal activity either is or has been taking place. But because these agencies don't have the direct access into telecommunications networks, nor do they really have the technical expertise to be able to perform these intercepts themselves, what typically happens is the responsibility or the burden of actually doing the interception itself falls on the network operators, and that's why I'm here talking to you today. So a lawful intercept is usually targeted at a specific user or a specific set of users. So we're not really talking about dragnet style mass surveillance. We're talking about a person or persons who the police or other agencies have reason to believe are committing a criminal activity. And these intercepts are typically supported by a lawfully issued warrant that has been inspected and signed off by usually an independent judge or magistrate. What these laws do all have in common is that they put very severe penalties or can impose severe penalties on network operators who fail to comply or assist the agencies with their intercept requirements. And this can range from significant monetary fines for the telecommunications company, but it can also include jail terms for specific individuals who are, let's say, non-cooperative. And so it's very important for operators to be as prepared as they can ahead of time before the agencies are knocking on their doors, asking for intercepts and help. So in the past, lawful intercepts tended to be quite simple. Operators would usually just use TCP dump or some similar tool to kind of siphon off the target's traffic into a PCAP file and deliver that to the agencies maybe the following day or a few days later. But that's really not cutting it in this day and age, and it's becoming an increasingly common requirement for lawful intercept to be streamed to the agencies in real time. And I've noted a few examples here that in the last year, both Fiji and Vanuatu updated their cybercrime legislation to require that lawful intercepts occur in real time. Many other countries are either in the process of doing that or have already done that. And this makes sense, right? Because this allows the agencies to be able to react to ongoing events. So if there's a terrorism event, for instance, or a kidnapping, they're able to get information that they can act on right away. So since we can't use PCAPs anymore, what we need are standards that can be that describe how lawful these intercepts should be captured and delivered. And there are two widely recognized standards for LI in the global space. The first one is the CALIA standard, and that's used in the USA and pretty much nowhere else. So you can more or less ignore that one. The standard that is generally used everywhere else in the world is the ETSI standard, which has come out of Europe, but has spread throughout Asia, Oceania, and many other parts of the world. Now, the reasons, of course, that we have for using these standards, firstly, the standards are written to make sure that the intercepts include as much useful information as they can, and that they're able to withstand scrutiny in court from defense lawyers and so on. So there's a lot of key information that has to be included alongside the captured traffic, and these standards define all of that. The other thing is that because the agencies themselves don't necessarily have a lot of technical expertise, they're going out and buying expensive equipment that they need to know is going to be able to interoperate with the intercepts that are being delivered by the operators. So having a standard means that there's this clear thing that everyone agrees on that they need to be able to do, and these protocols that they can follow. The unfortunate problem here is that these ETSI standards are very, very complex and quite difficult to implement. So we're looking at multiple documents, many hundreds of pages, and so that it's quite a challenging thing to go about implementing these standards, and it's certainly not something that most operators would expect to be able to do in-house, right? You're going to need a lot of expertise excuse me, in high performance packet capture, in decoding protocols, in tracking session state, and all of these sorts of things. So it's a non-trivial task. And so the first and most obvious option for people who need to deploy LI within their network would be to contact one of the specialist lawful intercept vendors, and there are quite a few around. And these companies specialize in providing these solutions. So it's their primary mode of business. And so they will create these entire systems that will include all of the features that you would need, including the management of your intercepts, delivering those intercepts to the LEAs, all of that kind of thing. And they'll offer you, the commercial grade support that you would expect from a large company. And that's fine as long as you happen to have a lot of money to spend. If money is no object, you'll be able to cope with the costs that come with these sorts of systems, because the costs will be high and they will be ongoing as well. And so this was a bit of a problem for many operators in New Zealand. So back in 2017, the government finally officially stated that the ETSI standards would be required for operators to conform to when providing lawful intercepts to the agencies. You'll note that this is several years after the Act itself was passed. Things can sometimes move slowly in government, but the key thing here was that the operators were caught a little bit off guard by this. Up until this time, they'd assumed that they would just be able to provide PCAPs and everything would be fine. The other problem from the perspective of New Zealand operators was that the legislation placed the entire onus of integrating a lawful intercept into a network on the operator itself. So there was no funding, no assistance whatsoever from government or from the LEAs themselves. So the operators had to find a solution, they had to pay for it, they had to integrate it, they had to do everything. And they soon realized that these vendor solutions were going to cost them a significant sum of money, including ongoing licensing costs. And this wasn't really something that many of the smaller operators could realistically afford. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the laws created the situation where if they failed to comply, they would also be stung with a significant cost, with fines of up to $50,000, 50,000 New Zealand dollars per day for non-compliance. So simply put, they were stuck between a rock and a hard place where they were going to have to spend a lot of money either way. And this is where the New Zealand Network Operators Group community came together and started to discuss trying to find a third option and working together to achieve that. And so what happened is they reached out to us at the University of Waikato because they know that we have a lot of experience in doing work in packet capture and packet decoding and analysis, and they thought that we would have the skills necessary to produce or to implement these standards. Of course, we needed some amount of money to cover the development costs, and so the operators agreed to work together to create a fund, each making a small contribution to produce a total fund that would cover all of the costs. And everyone involved agreed that the resulting solution has to be open source. It has to be made available to anyone who wants it. And this was in particular a big thing, or of big value, because we didn't have to concern ourselves with intellectual property rights and who actually owned what. And so the end result was the OpenLI project. So it's open source software that is able to do fully ETSI compliant LI. It's more or less, it has been designed and written by myself, a single developer, with some assistance from fellow members of my group from time to time. The key thing about OpenLI is it's designed to just run on commodity server hardware. So, 1U servers that you can just buy off the shelf, runs on Linux, and you can even run it inside a container or on a VM. And our target audience is really those smaller operators, right? So people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford a vendor solution, OpenLI now gives them an option. It's also reasonably flexible, and we think hopefully that people will find it relatively easy to integrate into their existing network. So here's kind of what it looks like as an overview, the OpenLI system. So if you start in the top left there, you might have an agency delivering a warrant to a very stressed and busy network operator. That operator will now be able to send REST API requests via a web form into the OpenLI provisioner component. The provisioner is really just a centralized management system for the whole OpenLI deployment. That provisioner sends out intercept instructions to a collector or multiple collectors. Those collectors will receive, we'll sit there and sniff traffic, both from your IP networks, but also specifically look for traffic belonging to AAA protocols or session management protocols like SIP, using those to determine which traffic belongs to which user. If it sees IP traffic that should be intercepted for a known intercept target, then the collector will encode that in the etc format, forward it on to the mediated device, which then pushes those intercepted packets back to the agency that requested them. And there are two different handovers there. There's the communication contents handover, which is the raw intercepted packets themselves. And then there's also the accompanying metadata, which primarily consists of messages saying, when sessions have been established, updates as to whether they're ongoing, if the target has changed their IP address, and so on. So you can distribute multiple collectors throughout your network. It's not just a single collector system, and you don't have to worry about shoveling all your traffic back to this one centralized point. So we usually recommend one collector for each sort of BNG or custom aggregation point you have in your network. As I kind of touched on, the collector reads the AAA protocols, parses them, and uses them to map users to their session IPs, and then it uses that information to make sure that it's only intercepting traffic for a genuine intercept target. It also means it can track any dynamic changes in the IP that the target may have. The other thing is that from a security perspective, only the mediator needs any external access outside of your network. Even within that, it doesn't need to accept any incoming connections. It only makes outbound connections. So that makes it relatively easier to secure. And so we've had a lot of success so far. We have a number of operators in New Zealand who are now using OpenLI in production. We've also had a lot of inquiries and interest from operators in other countries. And so what this means is that we're sort of in this ongoing development and maintenance mode right now. A lot of our funding comes from grants and sponsorship, but we're moving towards a model where people who are using OpenLI can sign a support contract with us and contribute funds that are essentially just used to keep me employed as an OpenLI developer and not get assigned to other projects. In New Zealand, we've also starting to develop this ecosystem around OpenLI. So many there's a couple of consulting companies now that offer OpenLI deployment as a service. And so some operators go to them and hand off all responsibility for their lawful intercept to the consultants who deploy OpenLI and maintain it for them. So a few lessons from this project in the couple of minutes I have remaining. So one that we kind of knew already going in it, but was emphasized as we work through deployments. Every network's different. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for LI. And many of the deployers that we've had have had to talk to us about requesting custom features, and we've been happy to accommodate them wherever possible. In particular, when it comes to thinking about where you're going to integrate OpenLI into your network, the traffic mirroring options that are available to different operators can vary quite significantly. And you really have to think about where does it make sense to mirror the traffic from, and how do you make sure that the AAA traffic and its associated IP traffic ends up in the same place or on the same collector, because the collector needs to know both things to be able to perform the intercept. One thing that's become very apparent over the course of this project, relationships matter. We were quite pleased and surprised to learn that the law enforcement agencies that we've worked with have been very helpful and encouraging us to make sure that this project is a success. They want operators to be able to perform LI, and they don't really care that much about how they do it. They just want them to have options available. They also really appreciate honesty on behalf of operators who aren't quite ready to be compliant yet, but are working through that process. They're not there just wanting to jump out and arrest you for not being compliant. The other thing is that it's really important that you work together with your fellow operators. In New Zealand, there's a lot of sharing of hints and tips on how to use OpenLI. There are Slack channels where people gather together and ask questions, and that's working out really well. The other thing that I think operators have learned from working with myself is that we're also very accommodating as long as you are nice and polite towards us. So do keep that in mind if you are an operator using open source software. That's, the nicer you are to the developers, the more accommodating they can be. We had to learn a lot about keeping a project like this alive. All of this continued development work and maintenance does come with a cost, but trying to find the money to cover those costs can actually take up a lot of time and effort, filling in grant applications, chasing up people, and just generally maintaining those relationships. So, that is a challenge, and we're still learning more about that as we go. The other thing we've learned is that it's important to manage user expectations with open source software. Some people can run the risk of getting a little bit entitled as to what they expect from you. In this situation, I'm a developer working on this project part-time, and while we get a little bit of sponsorship and people pay a little bit for a support contract, I can't be available 24/7 to help with that. So it's important to make sure that you're upfront about what you're offering when you're selling someone this idea of support for an open source project. Over the course of the time that we've been doing this, LI has become an increasing priority for governments everywhere. It used to be more of the thing that you would find in Western or developed countries, for want of a better term, but what we've seen now is that interception laws are being updated throughout the APRICOT region. And I think, and many other people think and have expressed to me, that having an open source solution like this available is something that really benefits the whole region. So looking abroad, we're trying to promote OpenLI. We're trying to work with people throughout the APRICOT region to figure out what else we need to do to encourage uptake. And a big thing that we're hoping to do over the next few months is develop some better educational materials for our users and try and just flatten that learning curve a bit. And the ISIF Asia Foundation has been very generous in helping us have funding to do that. And so finally, we do have funding, we do have a bit of time available. We'd love to talk to people more about what they would need for us to help them with an OpenLI deployment, what we need to do to make it better, and just work together to solve what has become a quite pressing problem, especially for smaller operators. So if you're interested in learning more about OpenLI, there are some links that you can follow, or you can get in touch via email, or you can contact me directly. And that is easily my time. So thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if we have time. Otherwise, get in touch with me offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane, for your wonderful expression, especially on this unique topic like OpenCLI. I'm sure that was really beneficial for our audience. But currently, I see one question from an attendee, and that is, I would like to read it out for you. I appreciate if you can quickly answer it. Hi, Shane, what new developments or improvements are you working on for OpenCLI that are in the pipeline?
Yeah, so the biggest things are just a lot of things relating to trying to help make it even more secure. We're trying to just add little features that people have been requesting. So for some of the voice over IP stuff, adding new fields that we accept for user identity. There's a lot of little bits and pieces. But as I said, the biggest thing right now is trying to actually develop some tutorial material, some teaching materials that people can use to learn how to use the software.
Thank you. I hope that answered the question. Thank you so much again, Shane, for your wonderful expression. With that note, I would like to introduce on this virtual stage of APRICOT 2021, our next speaker, ASM Shamim Reza from Link3 Technologies, and he will be speaking on people, process, and technology. Leverage open source technology to build your SOC. Over to you, Shamim.
Thank you, Afifa. Let me share my screen.
Yes, it is visible. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Apricot, for giving me the chance to talk this year. Reading a war history is kind of pretty interesting because it gives you the insight into the strategic move. We have seen so many Hollywood movies and documentary on few TV channels and get to know the history of World War II. Um, but if we analyze the reason behind the win of the Allied forces, that is based on their experience of First World War, they have upgraded their radar technology. Mr. Alan Turing was there to decrypt the coded messages. They have equipped with advanced weapons to defend themselves and avoid any moment of surprise. They have trained their ground forces and so on. And these are the moves that leads them to the victory. Now, if we look closer to that, there are three key points: people, process, and technology. And nowadays, these are the called the maturity model of security operations. Hello to all. This is Shamim. I work for Linktree Technologies Limited, the largest ISP in Bangladesh. And today, this talk is basically when I proposed this talk, my focus was something like that. There are so many technologies out there with different sort of feature set, and some of them share the same, and people are using it. But what if they can utilize these techs to build a complete security operation center on their own, rather than depending on the vendor every single time to sort out if anything goes wrong? Personally, I prefer to cook my own food instead of going to the restaurant for every single meal, so that I can make sure that I'm eating okay in any emergency situation. Um, So enough of the introduction. Let's move forward to the presentation. SOC, to define a SOC is a place where a group of people are charged with monitoring and defending the infrastructure against all the measures of cyber attack. And people, process, and technologies are the key component of an effective security operations center. I'll be talking more about these three matter in next few slides. But before that, let me come to the build process. To start building a SOC, there are four stages to follow. Planning covers the strategic part of a SOC, what and how to define and integrate the PPT. That includes team retention, skill development, defining and reviewing the existing policies, technology involvement, and so on. The second phase, you need to think of your infrastructure first, that how would you provision or escalate your SOC infrastructure. Then it comes to what data you should collect and how it can be done centrally, and how far could you automate the overall processes. When it come to the second phase, it basically depends on the deployment and integration part. And the final phase, that is operation. One must not think of like how many issues or ticket has been closed or resolved in a day or a week or so, because this is something where finding the root cause and remediation and automation is a key point. The motivation to build the SOC was to increase the visibility and secure our own service infrastructure. And to do so, I had to consider the cost of deployment, so that the one-time implementation expenditure should not exceed the budget. Keeping that in mind, I have selected few reliable open source technologies to work on that I'll be sharing in next few slides as well. Uh, Scalability was my other concern, that I should have the facility to provision my SOC infra, and that is why I choose Docker as the platform as a service, mm, kind of moving into the microservice architecture. In addition to this, I have worked with on the existing security policies to review, segmented how could we make our team member aware of it and along with the end user. And lastly, the source of truth takes place. That is kind of a central common point. Yes, we have a separate SOT for our network operations, but my concern was to have everything isolated and separated for the SOC to operate, and I have been using Netbox for it. Uh, in addition to that, there has to be a documentation portal where you can store all the documents related to process, best practice, checklist, report format, and so on. And the access should be defined based on the job description, like who can read, who can review, and who can edit all those things. Um, Before thinking about the SOC, we had the event and metric-based monitoring system that gives us runtime alerts, auto-generated reports on availability and performance. We have central syslog system to perform analysis for any incident. We had infrastructure security policies. We maintain CIS benchmark to ensure the configuration is hardened. We have remote access control policy, remote login policies, password policies, and so on, according to the NIST standard for both the system and network nodes. We have NetFlow Analyzer for the pattern analysis that is basically based on machine learning and so forth. But frankly speaking, these are not the enough for visibility that someone would prefer to work on. Uh, as I said earlier, that collecting data is very important for me, and in the process also, it is important for me to find out what is missing in my existing solution. Uh, I was in need of kind of a central place from where I can have the insight. Uh, so along with this existing component, I choose to have a log for any intrusions in terms of for both the network and application layer, software and package vulnerability detection system, metrics of DNS threats, honeypot, and other open source platform for the threat intelligence. And all the platform management and administration service were self-hosted, which starts from a private Git repository to an internal communication channel. Uh, At first, I choose Waza as my primary SIEM platform. The reason I choose Waza because it comes with the ELK stack by default, and it gives me most of my requirement in a single place that I don't have to worry about. Uh, it exports all those matched events to the central place so that the resource utilization can be much lower than I expected in terms of hard disk space utilization, RAM, and processor utilization. Mm, Personally, I'm not convinced with ELK stack, though it is a great solution for visibility and analytics, but it is really a resource-hungry service, and that is all my concern about ELK. The retention period of Wozalog has been configured to 3 years for now, but we will evaluate the period in the future. Then it comes to the DNS analytics. Personally, DNS is my most favorite part to work on. Frankly speaking, only working on DNS can cover most of the part of the infrastructure threat hunting process and detection of anomalies. Here you can see a diagram where the Anycast recursive, where it shows that the Anycast recursive DNS infrastructure is reconfigured with DNS RPZ, and the log from all the server has been exported by Promtail with custom levels. And the central log service is configured with Loki to host log for about 3 years for now. And as usual, Grafana has been used to analyze and visualize all those logs. In parallel, every DNS server is configured with Prometheus exporter to export all the metrics to the central Prometheus server. And as usual, Grafana is used to visualize and analyze those time series data. The fun part of working with Loki is that it compresses the log file in such a way that kind of reduce my headache about the log retention period. And the reason to work with the Grafana ecosystem is it is really lightweighted and it is not resource hungry like ELK platform. Other than this, right now I am working with an NLP framework to pollute the DNS RPZ feed by analyzing the DNS log, and the machine learning part is going to be integrated into the Grafana system. Uh, Now this particular failure is no longer be used because, as I am saying all the time, that I'm concerned about the resource utilization, and so I have been moving this ELK part of Silk to Grafana ecosystem. That is some people call PLG, Prometheus, Loki, and Grafana. And almost 90% of the Surikata NIDS infra has been shifted to the new one. And I believe rest of the 10% will be done within next few days. Uh, I'm really convinced with this infrastructure right now because this serves my purpose as I wanted, but this particular fella is not giving me what I want. Maybe it's because I designed the infra for only internal use that has been isolated from the internet. Uh, so I might need to change the design, or maybe I'm too busy working with other project and neglecting this part, or I'm really not sure of it. Maybe this is a negative impact of being a workaholic person, or maybe I need to sit on a sea beach or think of it what I should do. So this is all from the technology part. When it comes to the process is something that enables an expert to act quarterly in an emergency situation. Because in urgent matter, one might miss a step unintentionally, that could lead the overall response to be ineffective. And when it comes to a phishing attack, awareness is the key to lower the risk. Uh, in Link3 Technologies, for us, an awareness program has been performed inside the organization on a regular basis, and this is kind of a general task for us. Now, if there is any unwanted email is sent to one or some of our employees, they complain to us about those unwanted mail. We then collect those email with the original body, check and analyze those mail body thoroughly. After that, we search into the email log and find out how many of our users got those email. Is there any account has been compromised? And after that, we talk to our IT team, ask them to give access to the computer so that I can check the process, memory dumps, files, and so on to know that if it is affected with malware or not. If it is a yes, then we ask the IT team to take further action for the particular PC. In the meantime, we log the user account, change the credentials, then we draft a post-incident report, educate all employee for such attack, and update the incident documentation accordingly. The incident response part is a bit different for a service provider in compared to an enterprise company. Like if I consider the fact of having a ethnic honeypot, it really helps me to get all the threat intelligence, and it really helps me to find out the affected IPs within the Link3 network directly. And when we get an alert, we inform our user, and if they want or let us, we help them to find out the affected system inside their LAN or so. Otherwise, we provide the best practice to follow to harden their belongings. Beside this, we really don't have much work on the end user. Um, for the team, from the build and deployment process, I was the only person who has done all those things single-handedly, because due to the COVID situation, everybody was freaked out at that time. And it was actually the beginning. I started this project at the beginning of COVID, April last year. And but now I am getting help from my team, and I'm developing a training program to help the least experienced to get the related knowledge. Right now, there are 6 people working actively in SOC, from senior level to intermediate one, in terms of knowledge and experience. Uh, if someone considered the space of a service provider SOC, yes, one can question that this is not enough. Yes, I do agree, but we have what we have right now, and this is serving our purpose. But definitely, we are looking for the next engagement of bunch of people, and we are working on that. Um, Now let's talk about cases. This is regarding a DGA attack. I have experienced 15 of them in last 3 months, just 3 months. It happens in January 10th. At early morning, I have got an alert from the IDS system about an spike of a particular rule that is a bad traffic generator. So I took the IP, checked the DNS log query to know what this IP has been searching for. And here you can see all the logs. Those IPs has been searched. Uh, Here I have changed the DNS server IP and client IP, but the event is real. Seeing the log pattern, I assume that this is gonna be a DGA. Now, there are two issues arise. One is I didn't configure my Anycast DNS infra to have the passive DNS information in any given time. That was the drawback since the beginning. So to get further information for the analysis, I had to rely on the net flow data. And another issue is when any event occurs, I try to collect packet capture from the user premises. And here, this particular user is located to a remote place in Bangladesh. And due to the COVID-19 situation, managing a support engineer was really tough for me. But packet capture was necessary for a few reasons that I want to know the nature of the attack, so that I can help the incompetent IT concern of the client, who has really zero knowledge about information security. And based on the findings, I can recommend them to follow few best practices so that the same thing won't happen again. As you can see on the screenshot of the workshop packet capture, the net bus.
Shamim bhai, just to interrupt you a bit, you have a minute left. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you, Afifa. The net bus activity doesn't seem normal, and the characteristics tells that this particular activity is related to configure, which really tries to escalate itself to the network by its own. Other than the packet capture, I did perform a netflow data search and tried to find something interesting. And you can see that on January 11, 12, and 13, these are the connection has been made, and only 9:20 a.m. and these destination IPs on port 53. And I performed a search on my whole netflow data, and got a few thousand of IPs that have made the connection with those destination IP. And I let my customer support department to handle this part. Uh, when it comes to the challenge, what I have been facing, the major issue that is false positive alert, and the second one is escalating the SOC infrastructure. I thought hosting a Docker would serve, but no. When the host increase into a certain level, managing the Docker has become a tough job for me. The second one is there is a lack of subject matter expertise and the communication gap between the team. like I have gotten a log from a network device and I need to be sure of it, but the network expert is busy with something else and someone else. And future work, as I told that I'm going to shift all my Docker platform to Kubernetes, definitely for the better manageability, enable passive DNS in either bind or Suricata IDS, and move all the visualization part from ELK to Grafana for lower resource utilization. And lastly, I will incorporate OS query for the EDR. This is all for me. This was kind of the journey I had experienced from my SOC building process. I hope this would help to the audience, and if there is any questions, I would love to answer. Thank you, Afifa.
Thank you so much, Shamim Bhai, for your wonderful insight. Due to the time constraints, we won't be able to take any questions. But yes, if the audience is having any question, they can always mail to secretariat@apnic.net. With that note, I would like to introduce our last speaker of the security session. She will be presenting on a video, and the speaker is Renee Barton from Infoblox. And her speech will be about campaign distillery graph methods for reducing spam analysis.
Hi, I'm Renee Burton. I'm a data scientist and a threat researcher at Infoblox. I really appreciate being included in the APRICOT conference, and I'm sorry that I'm unable to join you all live. I will be asleep by the time you are listening to this presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions or engage in further discussion and collaboration offline after the conference through email. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is one of the methods that we are using within our threat intelligence group for reducing the amount of data that our analysts and threat researchers need to look through in order to find threats within our data. Using data science techniques and graph theory methodologies. What I'm going to show today is just a simple look at how these work and discuss a couple of statistics associated with this. It's part of our standard practice now, and it has been part of our workflow for quite some time. So, campaign distillery, we're gonna see how that all works. So the problem we're trying to solve at Infoblox is being able to get as many threat indicators for our customers as possible. We are DNS, DHCP IP management, often referred to as DDI, infrastructure provider, and we have the DNS firewall security, both for on-prem and cloud customers. So like many other people in the security arena, we're providing block lists, which include things like, for DNS, obviously, domain names and IP addresses with threat indicators to our customers. Our strategy for being able to make this as relevant as possible is to be many source. In other words, we're using a wide range of sources in order to aggregate and create intelligence and these block lists that we think are most likely to impact our customers across the globe. One of these sources that we use is spam. So a lot of spam is just annoying and spam, and is very well captured by spam filters. But spam is still used for an enormous amount of malicious activity, particularly for information stealers and ransomware. So we're able to leverage that data source in order to find email addresses and command and control systems that impact our customers. And we know that this source is particularly valuable for our customer base because we've been able to study it and the impact on customers for quite some time. The problem is there's a lot of spam in the world and everyone has a limited number of resources. So the question becomes, how can I harvest the data within spam? First, figure out which ones are interesting, which ones are malicious, and then extract the relevant elements in order to add to our security products. How do we do this efficiently given a limited amount of human resources to look at data? So in our case, what I'm going to talk about today is one using graph processing or graph theory. A graph, for those of you who might not be familiar, is just a representation of related data. The terminology that we use in the math world is nodes. Those are subsets of the data, and edges. Edges exist between two nodes if those nodes in some way are related. So there's many different ways in which you can construct a graph in any context where you have a network relationship, which can be very definitive, like this IP address is connected to this domain, or can be very statistical in nature, that this domain is somewhat similar to this domain, or if you were in a different subject matter space, an orange is similarly round to an apple, even though they're not related. You could have an edge between them that indicated the similarity of their shapes. In our case, we are using email metadata. So in particular, the subject lines, sender IPs, file names, that kind of information. You can use a wide range of information here. We're often looking at attachments, so you could use file sizes. You can use all the email header information from the SMTP IP traffic or SMTP traffic. So we're going to build a graph from all the data, and then we're using the graph to group the spam into likely campaigns. I'm going to show you a little bit how that looks, and then talk a little bit more specific examples here. This process, which I'm showing here on the left, is generally how it works, right? So really repeating what I've said on the last slide is we're going to take this spam, which is a very large volume collected all over. We extract these attributes from it. And those attributes really could be anything, as I mentioned. In the examples I'm going to do today, I'm mostly using subject lines and file names, but it could be IP addresses or email content or anything that I have within my data. I'm going to create a graph. I'm creating it all at one time, right? So I'm, tens, hundreds of thousands of emails at once are produced into this graph. And then within that graph, I'm going to compute what is called the connected components. Connected components just means that I take the whole graph and I isolate it into subgraphs or sections within that graph for which every node in that subsection is connected in some way to all the others. So in other words, they're the things that are connected to each other. And usually the graph will separate out into some large connected components, which we'll also call clusters. Those terms are used interchangeably in the graph world. And then often just small isolated or small other connected components or clusters. And then we use that to infer campaigns from the connected components. So in this experiment that we did early on in December 2019, for example, in that case, we're using about 21,000 emails. These all contained attachments. They were specifically chosen, actually. So they're attachments, and they contain some degree of VBA in them. We use the subject lines and the file names for creating a graph. So in other words, we take every subject line for every email, every file name for every attachment. Those are our nodes. All the subject names, subject lines, and all the file names create the set of nodes. And then there is an edge between a subject line and a file name if there exists some email in our corpus that has both that subject line and that file name. We create the graph of all of that. And then we look at the connected components, that is the things that are ultimately connected together by some set of edges. This reduces our data to 866 components. So in other words, we started with 21,000 plus emails, which, you know, traditionally we might hand to analysts and say, hey, go find me malicious behavior and grab the bad guy information out of it, which is obviously not scalable. In this case, we're able to find things that are like together, that aren't identical, but have a lot of correlation with each other. And that reduces us down to 866, which is still too big, admittedly. The next thing that we do is filter that data for non-trivial sizes. So if there's only one email that exists in our entire data set, and it's sitting by itself, it has a unique subject line and a unique file name, it's not connected to anything else. From our observation, that's a relatively small campaign. It could still be malicious without a doubt. But from a resource perspective, it ends up being a lot of work to go work on those. So we're going to focus on things that have at least a handful of emails in them. And I believe this 101 components comes from having at least 3 separate emails in order to get down to that size, 3 or 5. So at that point, we have 101 things. And now, because our hypothesis is that each of these connected components represents a single spam campaign, many of which will be malicious, some of which will not be, then our analysts only have to look at one file within each of these connected components. It's still 101 in this case, but they can reduce it further in order to prioritize the way they spend their time. In the end, though, even if you looked at 101 individual items, we've reduced the number of items needing review by 99.5%, all with a pre-human eyes processing step that goes pretty quickly. So let's take a look at some of the advantages for this process that we have found in our use of these techniques for reducing data. One thing we can do when we put the data together is capture campaigns a lot more effectively. Rather than looking at individual emails or even a very small amount, we can put them all together over a period of time. And we can see that because we allow for connectivity, we're able to discover things that aren't otherwise observed or known to be malicious. So in this graph, this is a connected component from that data set that is all emotet. And it does contain several days of data here. And it is between subject names, I believe, yeah, subject names and file, subject lines and file names. And then the lines are green if those are in virus total, and red if they're not in virus total. And I apologize for both the red-green colorblindness aspect. I apologize for that greatly, but also for the way that it could be interpreted backwards as red being bad. And in any case, the way this works is that the dominant part here on the right side, which is green, has save the planet .doc in it. Those are seen in virus total and known to be malicious. And over on the left side, though, there's a huge number that are not seen in virus total, not known to be malicious. But we're able to put them all together and understand them as single activity as of emotet through this graph connectivity. And this is a tendency that we see with a bunch of actors. Emotet who is a actor, also a particular type of actor who has their own infrastructure, who has malware downloaders for information stealing, among other things. They're a very dominant player in malicious spam environment. They have some techniques that make them a bit sloppy. So what happens is you will have file names that will be reused across campaigns that from a subject perspective are really not relevant or related to each other in any way. Sometimes you see the exact opposite happen as well, a subject line that's passed across multiple file names. And so when you look at that data holistically, rather than looking at it as individual events, you see all of this connectivity where, again, about half of the right side are known to be bad and known to be emotet, and then this portion over here was not known. In fact, nearly 50% of these attachments were not seen. So this really allows us to see a variety of not only the campaign, but when we look at this closely, we can actually see tendencies of how certain actors behave, and emotet being a classic one here. This is just to give another example of how we can use discovery over time. Again, the graph itself is actually just a mathematical object. It's not a visualization or anything like that. You can use all sorts of layouts to view that data, but it is often helpful to look at it visually and not just algorithmically. So what we can find over time, if you're used to just pulling up the graphs from a couple of days of spam or mouse spam, and you look at that over time, you get a good sense of what certain actors look like. Again, emotet, because they're such a dominant player and they have very specific ways in which they operate, you can really end up seeing that visually. So not for you guys to actually know, but emotet, when you look at them in this way consistently over a very, very long period of time, they have this tendency to be sort of maybe like, sea creature-y sort of things where they've got these tentacles that connect together independent clusters of information. Very unique in that sense. So whenever you see this sort of big clusters all together, but they trail and attach to each other, invariably that's an emotet behavior. So these two over here, which are also quite big, are not emotet. They're very distinct. And then also in this case, this is from May 2020. This case, it's also not emotet, but it's very, very large campaign. This turned out to be an actor that we discovered called Wordy Thief, or who we call Wordy Thief, who is a Russian spam actor who also works in information stealers only, a very interesting actor that we've been watching for a long time. And we do have a paper published on that and available on the website if you're interested in actor kinds of things. So this we saw and saw that it was not emotet, but it was very large. And then where we used that for discovery, determined in fact that it was an actor that we hadn't seen previously. We were able to unroll their history and actually track them on a regular basis. Okay. We can also find that we need to use multiple days in order to really see information over time. So what we find here in these three things, three pictures, is if we just look at one day of activity, December 18th for this data set, and I'm just looking at emotet here. If we just look at one day of activity, we see that emotet is broken into three distinct clusters here. That's very common for emotet behavior. Now, if I add in a couple of days and I do December 18th through the 20th, everything starts to come together, and it's actually a single connected component looking like a big piece with another with another tail off. And then if I look over this, I think it's 6-day period, you get what I consider to be kind of a classic emotet signature of 3 big clusters that are just loosely connected to each other. So it gives us a better sense of understanding the full campaign and also how that particular actor might be acting. Okay. So we've been using this in our workflow, as I said, for quite a long time. There are other ways in which we use very similar types of graph processing in order to understand and reduce the analytic burden of large volumes of data. This one is particularly effective for threat research. We worked with University of Washington, Tacoma, and their graduate program to try and find a better way to isolate these. In the end, overall, this method was generally stronger than the machine learning approaches. We're still hopeful that we'll be able to find other approaches, at least ones to augment this. But for right now, this works really well. And the UWT students and professors have drafted a paper, which is going to appear relatively soon, called Clustering Analysis of Malware Campaigns, which also uses a lot of virus total labels and other approaches to malware campaign identification, trying to advance the science on that in an unsupervised fashion. And that is it. So thank you very much. I, again, appreciate the opportunity. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Renee. So with that, with Renee's wonderful expression, we are at the end of our security session of APRICOT 2021. We won't be able to take any Q&A for the time constraints, but again, if you have any questions, you can always mail to secretariat@apricot.net. So handing over to Shishio for making some announcements. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Africa and the 3 speakers and everyone who attended the session. Please quick answer for the session poll. The session was a recording and the slide will be available on the conference program page. And the next infra section will come on very soon, 12 to 15 UTC 8 Manila time. Please rejoin the Zoom again. Thank you for attending.